Think about the last time you made a decision you immediately regretted. Chances are it wasn't at 9 a.m. It wasn't after a good night's sleep, a quiet morning, a slow cup of coffee. It was probably late, after a long day, when you were tired in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. You ordered food you didn't need, sent a message you shouldn't have, skipped something you'd promised yourself you'd do, made a choice that the morning version of you would have handled completely differently. And here's the thing. You knew even as it was happening that it wasn't your best call, but something that normally stops you from making that choice wasn't there anymore. Psychologists spent decades calling that something willpower, and they built an entire theory around why it runs out. Then the science started falling apart. What emerged from the wreckage of that theory is more complicated and more interesting than anyone expected. And it changes the way you understand not just why you make bad decisions at night, but whether willpower, as most people think of it, actually exists at all. The original theory, and why it made sense. In the late 1990s, psychologist Roy Baumeister at Case Western Reserve University proposed what became one of the most influential ideas in behavioral psychology. He called it ego depletion. The theory was elegant and intuitive. Self-control, Baumeister argued, draws on a limited cognitive resource, something like mental energy or glucose, that gets depleted through use. Every act of self-regulation, every decision, every moment of resisting impulse draws down this resource. As it depletes throughout the day, the capacity for self-control weakens. Which is why, by evening, you're more likely to eat the thing you said you wouldn't eat, snap at someone you didn't mean to snap at, or abandon the habit you'd been carefully maintaining. The research seemed to confirm it. In a famous early study, subjects who had resisted eating cookies, an act of self-control, subsequently gave up faster on a difficult puzzle than subjects who hadn't. The first group's self-control resource had been depleted. The effect replicated across dozens of studies. Ego depletion became a cornerstone of behavioral psychology. It also became a cultural phenomenon. The idea that willpower is a finite resource that runs out, like a battery, filtered into productivity advice, diet culture, habit formation frameworks. It made intuitive sense. It matched people's experience, and it was, for nearly 2 decades, accepted as established science, when the science started falling apart. In 2015, a large-scale replication study attempted to reproduce the ego depletion effect across 23 laboratories in 36 countries. The effect nearly vanished. Not weakened, nearly disappeared. The meta-analysis found effect sizes close to 0. Studies that had seemed to confirm ego depletion had been smaller, less rigorous, and subject to publication bias. The tendency for positive results to get published and null results to disappear into file drawers. When the field looked at the full picture, the battery model of willpower had almost no support. Baumeister pushed back. Other researchers defended variations of the theory, but the field was forced to confront an uncomfortable possibility. One of its most celebrated findings might not be real. So what is actually happening when you feel your self-control crumbling at 10 p.m.? The new picture. Motivation, not depletion. The most compelling alternative account comes from researchers Michael Inslicht and Brandon Schmeichel, who propose that what looks like depletion is not a resource running out. It's a shift in motivation. The brain in this model is not a battery that drains. It is a system that continuously makes cost-benefit calculations about where to allocate attention and effort. Self-control is not a fixed resource. It is the output of a system that is always weighing the cost of regulation against the perceived value of the goal being regulated toward. What happens over the course of a long day is not that you run out of willpower, it's that the calculation changes. Morning, you has full information about your goals, fresh motivation, and a clean slate of competing demands. The cost of self-regulation feels low relative to the value of the goal. Evening, you has been making decisions and managing demands all day. The motivational system has been running cost-benefit calculations continuously, and the perceived cost of continued self-regulation has risen, while the perceived immediate value of the easier option has also risen, because the brain's reward systems become more salient when effort feels high. You don't lose the capacity to resist the late-night snack. The calculation just comes out differently. What the brain is actually doing. This reframing has specific neurological support. Research using fMRI has found that the prefrontal cortex, the region most associated with self-regulation, decision-making, and impulse control, does not show the kind of resource depletion the battery model predicts. What it shows instead is a change in the balance of activity between the prefrontal cortex and subcortical reward systems, like the striatum. As the day progresses and demands accumulate, the relative influence of the prefrontal cortex over behavior decreases, not because it has run out of fuel, but because the motivational weighting has shifted. The reward systems become relatively more influential. The pull toward immediate gratification gets stronger not because self-control has been used up, but because the brain's ongoing cost-benefit analysis is now tilting toward short-term payoff. Neuroscientist Matthew Apps at the University of Oxford has studied the neural basis of effort-based decision-making and found that the brain has a dedicated system for calculating whether a goal is worth the cognitive cost of pursuing it. That system is sensitive to accumulated effort over time, meaning that decisions made after a demanding day are not made with less capacity, but with a different set of inputs. The goal hasn't changed. The brain's assessment of whether it's worth the current cost of pursuing it has. What this means for how you understand yourself. The shift from the battery model to the motivational model is not just academic. It changes the way you interpret your own behavior. Under the battery model, making a bad decision at night is evidence of a depleted resource, something that happened to you that you couldn't help because you were running on empty. This framing is partially accurate in its conclusion, but misleading in its mechanism. Under the motivational model, the same bad decision is the output of a cost-benefit calculation that your brain made, correctly given the information and context available to it at that moment. The morning version of you had different information, different motivational context, and different competing demands, and made a different calculation. Neither version was irrational. They were operating under different conditions. This matters because it shifts the point of intervention. If willpower is a battery, the only solution is to conserve it or recharge it. If it's a motivational calculation, the variables in that calculation can be changed. The perceived cost of self-regulation, the perceived value of the goal, the competing pulls of immediate reward. The question is not, how do I have more willpower? It is, what does my brain need to make the calculation come out differently? Roy Baumeister, responding to the replication crisis around his work, has maintained that some form of resource-based depletion is real, that the motivational account doesn't fully explain the pattern of results, even the ones that survived scrutiny. The debate in the field is ongoing. What is no longer debated is the simple version of the battery model. Willpower is not a tank that empties. The mechanism is more complex, more dynamic, and more tied to context than the original theory suggested. which means the experience you've had 1,000 times, making the choice at 10 p.m. that you wouldn't have made at 10 a.m., is real. The explanation for it is just different than you were told. There's something worth sitting with in what this research reveals. The decisions you make when you're exhausted are not failures of character. They are not evidence that you lack discipline or that your goals don't matter to you enough. They are the output of a brain that has been running cost-benefit calculations all day. And by evening, the math just comes out differently. The battery didn't run out. The calculation changed. Whether that distinction makes the decisions easier to live with or harder probably depends on when you're reading this. Mind Translator, Psychology, translated clearly.